Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here again. Great to see so many faces. Things have come back to normal. The room is filled up quite nicely, so really pleased about that. Need to take my mask off. Thank you very much for that. I'm so used to it nowadays. It's unbelievable. Did much better. Thank you. Just picking up on the great presentation of Pablo. Good overview of eSIM and where the market is. One thing I like to challenge is where actually IoT is with eSIM, and we're going to address that today because we see actually a totally different, let's say, status of the market in terms of eSIM adoption. Many of our customers, most of our customers are actually asking for eSIM, so it's quite interesting to see the difference in perception, and maybe we should have a conversation around that later on. So today we're going to talk about the linchpin. Can eSIM be the linchpin for Massive IoT? A big topic, Massive IoT, as part of the IoT ecosystem. Of course, just tailored around low-power solutions, a specific use case in the IoT space, and we'll talk about some of the developments that we're seeing. But maybe starting with the eSIM developments of the last 6 years. If you think about how fast things have moved over the last 6 years, I think the first M2M standard was ready in 2016 or something. Then, of course, the solution had to be developed. And over those last 6 years, the ecosystem has truly evolved to an almost mature situation right now where there is an eSIM available. And we expect that the growth of eSIM will continue to take place over the coming years. And as mentioned just in my introduction and referring to Pablo's presentation, we already do see that a lot of the deployments are requesting eSIM. If we look at the RFPs that we're participating in, every single one is requesting eSIM. So I think eSIM is there, the notion of eSIM is there, the need for eSIM is there, and the customers are asking for it. If we look at the evolution of the subscriptions, the IoT, Massive IoT deployments over the next years, that's going to be a huge ramp up from where we are right now. I think everybody has been waiting for this ramp up, and we can actually see it happening right now. The ecosystem is ready for that. If you look at the numbers which we expect to be deployed over the next few years, so billions of devices that will be rolled out in the market over the next few years, imagine that every day millions of devices will be deployed. And at that scale, that requires a solution that is secure, that is at the right price point, it has to be cost effective, and obviously it has to be seamless. Those three things need to be there to actually, let's say, make that scale happen. And that means there's a lot of complexity in there. And for those who don't know Kore that well, we do more than connectivity. We actually simplify the complexity of IoT. That's our mission statement. And we do that through connectivity, solution, and analytics. And connectivity obviously is an important part of that because that's the backbone of any IoT solution because you need to be connected. And if we think about Massive IoT, obviously there's different use cases with static devices that could be using NB-IoT, like smart metering, that need deep indoor coverage, and other applications like healthcare applications, where you've got wearables that also need to support, for example, VoLTE, where you would be using LTM. So those different technologies will be supporting different use cases depending on those details. The growth is tremendous, and I think we need to be ready to support that scale as an industry. But if you then think about the use cases that are being supported, it's important to maybe take one step back, right? As an industry, we tend to talk about eSIM as a technology. But for the customer, it's not about eSIM, it's about getting devices connected. It's just getting that experience that he wants his application to work. He wants to take a device out of the box, get it connected to the cloud in a secure way, and have no hassle of provisioning it. That notion of, let's say, that single lifetime of the device, true out-of-the-box experience, no touch, that's where we're heading for as an industry, and that's where we need to help our customers and support in the solution that we have. And Pablo just showed let's say, the perception or the views of the operators on, let's say, the status of eSIM and the market. This is more of a perception view of the customers, right? I'm taking the customer perspective as we work with customers on a daily basis. So the three main drivers that we see for eSIM with our customers are network sunsets, obviously. We're talking about 5G, we're talking about all kinds of sophisticated use cases but think about the fact that in the US, we just came through the 2G sunset, or we're in the midst of it. In Europe, we're having 3G sunsets this year. In 2025, we have the 2G sunsets. So we'll still be facing, let's say, the replacement of all technologies, and applying eSIM for those replacements is so important to make it future-proof. Permanent roaming is another big topic that is driving eSIM, right? So we know all about the countries where permanent roaming is not allowed. You cannot work without a local solution, so eSIM is truly providing a solution for those restrictions. And then lastly, supply chain optimization. Multiple SKUs, stock keeping units that an OEM has to have if he wants to ship his device globally. Getting that back to a single SKU would be brilliant. It simplifies, let's say, stock management, it simplifies logistics. If you can do the provisioning of the device at a later stage, depending on where it lands in the field. So those three items are the main drivers for eSIM that we have seen and we actually get back from the market. So picking up on that and maybe looking at what actually eSIM does more beyond that. What are the true roadblocks that we see our customers are facing in their IoT journey and getting their devices connected? So we talked about future-proofing, very important for, let's say, getting your return on investment, making sure that you don't get stranded devices and make sure that you get a cost-optimized solution, but also regulatory compliance. Let's say the landscape is changing on a daily basis. Permanent roaming has been there for quite a while. We've got data sovereignty, which is changing in different countries, getting more strict and strict to make sure that data stays local. And eSIM is a great means to comply with those situations. Zero-touch provisioning, I mentioned that before. Getting the experience of, let's say, taking a device out of the box, powering it up, and working without any, let's say, hassle. That zero-touch digital experience is something that eSIM will bring and something that is not available without eSIM. And then security, a big topic and a big impediment for the growth of IoT so far. Obviously, a SIM card is, let's say, secure in the sense that it authenticates in a secure way to the network, but also having a secure way to remotely provision the profile is an important piece. And on top of that, the SIM card is much more than just an authentication to the network nowadays. It does provide new means to securely transfer data, securely connect to the cloud. We'll talk about that later on a little bit more. And of course, coverage and resilience. It all starts with having your devices connected, and therefore you need to have coverage. And making sure that you've got profiles available that provide you with ubiquitous coverage globally is essential, and is actually the starting point for any use case for eSIM. And eSIM can make sure that you get coverage, but also resilience. Some critical mission-critical applications, they just need to have resilience in order to meet SLAs that are relevant for those use cases. Other may not, and you'll choose for a different option. And in the end, it will drive minimizing TCO. Think about the supply chain, think about, let's say, avoiding truck rolls. All those elements which are being mitigated will drive lowering of TCO for our customers. But then the question is, what is actually an eSIM? We see eSIM all over the place, right? So everybody has an eSIM nowadays, and it's brilliant that everybody's embracing it. But I think it's also good to truly understand what an eSIM is. In the end, an eSIM is only valuable if you can use it. If you cannot switch to another network, there's little value in an eSIM. So that's why we make a distinction between eSIM and EUICC. So eSIM is the capability to switch the profile remotely. The EUICC is just a SIM card that gives the platform to do that. And making sure that you've got switching options is the key to it. It's not just about the plumbing. The standards, of course, cater for the plumbing, the technical, let's say, the technical infrastructure to allow for remote profile switching. But how do you orchestrate that? How do you make sure that if you do a switching campaign, it's actually successful? All those things are very relevant in looking for an eSIM solution. And related to that, of course, you need to have an ecosystem of carriers that is sufficiently rich to make sure if you have a device that ends up in a certain country, you can actually connect to that network to comply with local regulations, or to make sure that you've got low latency on the basis of eSIM. You have to make sure that the ecosystem is expanding, is growing, and is catering for, let's say, the coverage needs that our customers have. the version that we'll be using, there's many solutions out there nowadays, and I think the number of RSP remote SIM provisioning platforms is growing. We believe that it's important to adhere to the standards to make sure that you've got a secure solution that is certified. That is important to the carriers as well. So adoption, I think, goes hand in hand with certification. So choosing the right, let's say, solution that is certified and making sure you're on the right version, because not every version is backward compatible, is important there. Another big piece, and I think Pablo touched on that briefly as well, is device compatibility. Fortunately, a lot of investment have been going into making devices compatible over the last few years, but it's so essential that if you roll out your eSIM solution, of course, it's an obvious statement, but it has to be able to switch the profile. And that upfront validation is something that you should be able to do as a customer. Make sure that you're eSIM ready. And then the last one, which is kind of a last resort remark here, there's multiple vendors in the marketplace that provide RSP platforms, and there's no intent to go from one vendor to the other per se, but if there were to be a reason to move from one remote SIM provisioning platform to the other, you have to make sure that you could do a so-called SMSR swap to be future-proofed from that last perspective as well. So if you then look at an eSIM deployment, what are the stages that customers typically going through? And with every investment that you're doing, it's no different for eSIM. There has to be a business case, right? We have to remember that eSIM is a means to an end. We don't want to adopt eSIM just for the sake of adopting eSIM. We're trying to solve a problem here for a customer. And in many cases, eSIM is a no-brainer. It's a no-regrets option to apply. In other cases, it may be, let's say, increasing the cost a little bit, maybe a little bit more challenging to get the business case sound. But having a clear understanding what you want to establish with eSIM and how it impacts your use case is important, because you may need to invest in your system because it's a more digital experience. You may need to invest in the devices because the devices may need to work with some kind of consumer standards and be compatible. So that investment, of course, needs to be verified to make your business case sound. And then if you think that eSIM is actually the way to go, then the question is, which one are you going to use? Obviously, it all starts with your connectivity requirements. As stated before, depending on, let's say, the use case, you need to have resilience, yes or no, mission-critical applications, have higher availability that it needs. You may have, let's say, a battery-powered solution that requires MBIoT or LTM for the Massive IoT. Deep indoor coverage, all those things will drive your selection of technology. And once you got your technology straightened out, then the question is, okay, do you want to go M2M eSIM, do you want to go consumer eSIM? M2M eSIM obviously has been developed for the IoT space, but we see a lot of traction on the consumer side as well because of the fact that you're not reliant on SMS, which is an issue in some cases. So both are viable options, and you should think through which one you want to use in your deployment. That also relates to the reason you want to adopt eSIM, right? Some people want to use eSIM just for the sake of future-proofing. Think about smart metering companies that have meters in the field that last there for 20 years. Nobody knows what the world will look like in 20 years, and maybe it's insurance policy for some time in the future. Basically, the pain that we go through with the 2G sensors right now. Whereas others, like OEMs, truly want to have a bootstrapping solution where they build a device, they put it to the field, and it localizes on the basis of let's say, the network it's ending up with. So all those things you have to think through to come up with the right technology strategy. And when you decided of that, they need to be eSIM ready. eSIM, like mentioned before, is a much more digital experience, and that also means that the enrollment of eSIMs is a different process than we have with traditional SIM cards. And your systems need to be ready for that. The same holds true when you roll out the SIM cards, the eSIM cards. Obviously, if you do bootstrapping and localization, how are you going to make sure that it's ending up with the right profile? If you think about the fact that in the M2M use case, you need to send an SMS to the device. The SMS needs to trigger let's say the data channel, and then the profile will be downloaded. How do you know it actually works? How do you keep control, track, monitor of your campaigns? And And then lastly, if you think about the management of your connectivity and the profiles, the connectivity is not different from any other SIM card, right? An eSIM does the same thing as a normal SIM card. It authenticates to the network. It allows you to use, let's say, data, voice, in some cases, SMS. So in that sense, it's not different, and the management of that connectivity is not different from your traditional SIM card. What is different is, of course, the management of your profiles. You will have a bunch of profiles available. How are you going to make sure that your device is using the right profile at some point in time in some region? So that takes logic, that takes orchestration, that is relevant for, let's say, managing the whole fleet, especially if you think about the massive IoT, the scale that you're working at. It's easy to manage 10 SIM cards. It's not so easy to manage 1 million SIM cards, as we know from experience. And maybe ending with this slide, which shows that eSIM is much more than just remote SIM provisioning. I've mentioned before, of course, a SIM card is meant to authenticate to the network, but with the secure enclave that is available on the SIM card nowadays, you can do much more. And we just released a product together with Kigen and Energy Web, which combines 3 new technologies and is hosted on a SIM card. So we use the SIM card, the secure element, to basically host the IoT SAFE solution, which provides keys for authentication, secure authentication of the device itself to the cloud, but also authentication to the blockchain. The blockchain is an Energy Web blockchain, so it's meant for utilities. Think about the use case where a customer of ours, and that's how this was driven, is going through the energy transition, right? So we get distributed energy generation. Your house becomes basically an energy plant in the future with solar panels. Your car is going to become storage of energy. Cars will come into the utilities ecosystem. You need to bill for charging. You need to bill for, let's say, the transfer of energy from one battery to the other. And managing that, making sure that the devices that enter into the ecosystem and that the transactions that are being done for billing, we secure that through the blockchain. So this is, I would say, a really exciting use case that further enhances the security of those use cases, the security of the data, the security of the IoT ecosystem. And maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that in the panel discussion we'll be starting in a bit. Which brings me to the panel discussion, actually. So I think Lobek is going to come up. Gloria?
Thank you very much, Marco. Maybe you can take that.
Thank you.
If you could please take a seat
for
the panel. So, thank you. Thank you very much. So, I would like to welcome now Loic Bombarlet, please. Loic's VP Product and Marketing from Kigen. I think I made some mistake before when I introduced him. I apologize about that. So now we're going to sit and we're going to go through some questions around this very interesting keynote and the collaboration that these two companies have on different projects. So I think I haven't really given you the opportunity to introduce yourself. So maybe we start with Loic and you can tell us what you do for Kigen, and then we'll continue with Marco.
Yeah, so thank you, Wilon. So yeah, I'm Loic Bombarlet. I'm leading the product and marketing at Kigen since 3 years roughly. So I come from a really strong cellular in background, I would say, spending many years to help a customer integrate modules, and now working on eSIM and iSIM adoption in the industry, and to make it simpler for customers to deploy their solutions, right? So yeah, very pleased to be here with you.
Fantastic. Marco, please, would you like to?
So my name is Marco Bijvels. I'm heading the EMEA and APAC region for Kore Wireless. My background is I actually entered into the IoT industry through smart metering, so that's something that's close to my heart. I love to work with customers, so the complex use cases and let's say the problems that we solve for them is something that drives me, and well, love to work with those large-scale deployments that we're just talking about.
Fantastic. So as you said, you love working with customers. That's why one of the things that you said in your presentation is that you know what are the roadblocks for IoT massive adoption with eSIM. And one of them that you list was security. So like following up on security, what's the role of security in massive IoT deployments then?
Yeah, so security is becoming more and more prevalent. I think we have a number of studies that indicate that it's top of mind for enterprise. I could quote, for example, the Economist intelligence unit who did a study among key IT demands and things that they want to look at, and cybersecurity was one of the first items that came up, actually the actual first item. We have also a growth in the intelligence that goes inside devices, right? So Kigen is an animation of ARM, and you have more and more processing power into devices, meaning that you have more and more capabilities and intelligence going into those devices, and that means companies are putting more value and more of their knowledge into those devices. So they really want to be able to secure that data and secure that extra knowledge that they have about their business, right? We have an interesting report on that that we worked on with Beecham that gives you some insights on secure IoT edge in 2022, so that's available on our website as well. So yeah, this is really becoming a key aspect, and I would say even for the regular consumer in general, right? I think consumers are more and more paying attention to is the device that I'm going to invest in respecting my privacy, and do I work with a company that effectively makes strides into making sure that my data is secure. So even from a social and ethical aspect of things, I think companies have something to gain to show that they are best citizens, I would say, into the security domain.
Yeah, absolutely. Marco, do you agree or disagree with those statements?
No, absolutely. We know that security has been the big impediment for the growth of IoT, and I think we've got solutions now to actually come up with a solution, well, to counter, to give an option to counter that. So I totally agree. And if you think about where we are nowadays, right, the situation in Russia, cybersecurity is a huge topic. Is more relevant than ever, and I think as an industry, we have to make sure that the solution that we deploy, that our customers deploy, that we support a secure situation for the end users, because we don't want to compromise critical infrastructure. So I totally agree with that.
Definitely, it's not the elephant in the room anymore. Everyone's talking about it. So Marco, following up with you as an IoT enabler, what are you seeing from customers? You already said you love getting in touch with them. For those that have already IoT real estate established and need to move it over, what are you seeing in this space?
Yeah, so customers moving over to eSIM. Well, there's a few use cases maybe to mention here, right? So if you think about customers that already have a deployment, moving over to eSIM, it's certainly something that's top of mind with those, right? So like I mentioned before, any deployment that we do nowadays, most of the SIM cards that we ship are eSIMs. So just to put it out there. Just give two examples of customer use case that we work with, just to make it come alive a little bit. So we work a lot in the healthcare space, for example. If you think about the use case there where our customers are doing clinical trials globally, where devices will be deployed in, let's say, 60, 80, 100 countries. Yeah. You need to have local connectivity because you have to comply with regulations, especially in the healthcare space, very regulated space. Then you understand that there's a true need for eSIM. So that's certainly one. If you think about, well, the smart metering example was given already. If you think about the smart metering space, where the pain is in the fact that the device will be out for 20 years, we actually already worked prior to the eSIM standards on, let's say, future-proof solutions. Mm-hmm. But with eSIM coming, clearly there's a solution right now that they feel comfortable adopting, and there's been a huge focus in that industry to adopt eSIM. So it's a little bit different from what Pablo was saying. So I'm a bit surprised that I don't see any traction over there, because with the companies that we work with, for those examples, eSIM is really a driver to make sure that they meet their customer needs when it comes to connecting their devices and basically able to bring their IoT applications come to life.
Yeah, absolutely. So like from your perspective as an eSIM global security provider, if you could have some customers that have already deployed eSIM on here today. What would you tell us? What would you recommend them to do to move forward?
So I think it's really an opportunity for notably the device makers to really take a thing through their security approach, right? And eSIM now gives you a possibility to effectively secure the device to the same level, right, that the telecom industry has been asking from the ecosystem, you know, the SIM vendor, the chipsets and modules, right? So this industry has been extremely demanding in terms of level of security, right? And you can use this, I would say, knowledge and expertise that comes from this industry and apply it to your application. And that's where we are very proud to be able to work with Kore on notably this announcement with EnergyWeb as an example, where you combine, you have now credentials that you can use inside the eSIM that are really the property of the device maker. And that's really important to understand that. It's really completely their property and their credentials to authenticate their device to their application, to their backend office, right? And you could think of, okay, this is applicable in the energy where you can transact, you know, with equipment in your home or as a small provider of energy with the grid, as an example. You could extend that to other domain, right? Peer-to-peer exchange in the medical space that Marco mentioned, financial industry, right? Transaction, and you have this whole movement in decentralized finance, right? Well, with crypto, with a lot of aspects there, where you can leverage, if you have a device which is cellular-based, well, let's exploit it to the maximum and use the functionality, notably through IoT SAFE, of enabling a stronger security level.
Yeah. And following up with you, we've heard a few comments on Kore's presentation on why eSIM is the linchpin of Massive IoT, obviously, and you have a vantage point of view on globals as a global security provider. So how are you seeing eSIM impacting IoT scale?
So really, it's bringing scale in the sense that it gives the peace of mind in the long term, really. Marco mentioned that already, but to be able to really have access to the right connectivity. And you know that things change, right, over time. You have an initial deployment, you have an initial, I would say, business plan, right, to deploy a certain number of countries. And depending on your success, you might want to scale up or scale down, right? And in that sense, a new SIM profile, for example, allows you to scale a little bit your connectivity needs, right? Matching where you're at in your deployment. So I think that's really something that is positive in the sense that you can start small, right? And iterate. And quite often, coming back to Marco's point on you need the business case at the beginning, well, you can trial your business case on a reasonable scale and expand, right, if you are new to cellular. And if you are an established player with, I would say, a wide number of devices deployed in the field, well, you can reduce your number of SKUs, you simplify the provisioning process, and ultimately, there is an opportunity to reduce the cost down, because I would say now more and more players are enabled with eSIM. There is natural competition among the suppliers also there to bring the cost down. And absolutely. I think the adoption will help with this transition.
And now that you mentioned that, that's definitely one of the key points that everyone's talking about, how to reduce the price in IoT devices that are going to be notably cheaper, and then how do we keep the security as high quality as we want without actually increasing the security in it. So Marco, then, what are your thoughts on IoT scalability in GSMA? That's everyone talks about, you know, how can we scale in the future our standards to the right direction? So what would you say?
Yeah, I think Loic already mentioned a lot of those topics which are relevant indeed. I think want to bring it back again to the customer experience, right? We tend to talk a lot about eSIM, but let's think about the actual deployment of a customer. And eSIM to us is a very important tool in a toolbox which is much bigger. So I mentioned orchestration of eSIM profiles, but it's much more than that. And again, picking up on the fact that we see a lot of traction on eSIM, that has not so much to do with eSIM alone. It has to do with the whole solution that you build around it. The orchestration, we've got our own core eSIM profile, which is different from a carrier profile. Bringing that all together allows us already to scale, so that's one thing. On the security side of things, I think that IoT SAFE will bring a lot of trust in the ecosystem. and also lowering of cost. If you think about the fact that some of our customers are building their own security solution outside of the SIM card, it's just an expensive solution right now which can be replaced with something that is fully integrated, so it's simpler, easy to deploy, and it does the trick out of the gate. So those are the elements that allow us to scale, I believe, connectivity going forward with eSIM. So it contributes not just to the, let's say, the primary use cases that we all know, but also to those more, let's say, well, advanced use cases that are becoming more and more important, that we should educate the market in terms of what they do, how they can bring benefits to the customers, and make sure that we get POCs running for those new technologies.
And definitely that's what we as customers going to see. It's not whatever piece of software we put inside of it, it's the final solution that we see.
It's the final solution.
Exactly. So, and let me ask you, maybe you've been told this question, where do you see yourself in whatever number of years, right? But where do you see the eSIM going? Where would you see, what can people expect from eSIM deployments and security milestone in the next 12 months? Let's keep it short.
Yeah, so maybe I can start on that one to say that together with GSM and the rest of the industry, we are working really hard on the evolution of the RSP and the eSIM in general, really adapted to massive scale and massive IoT. So notably in the sense of low power WAN network, for example, solutions that work well over CAT-M and NB-IoT networks. That's one of the key requirements. And also benefit from the learnings on the consumer specification and the evolution from M2M consumer, and build up on top of that to really facilitate notably the access to even more connectivity profile at a wider scale across the board for IoT fleet deployments, right? So that's really something that we are working hard on. Kigen is chairing the so-called Working Group 7 at GSMA, which is defining the IoT RSP. So we are really spending a lot of effort to take a very pragmatic approach to this. We've already tested some elements of technology on live networks, for example, to demonstrate that we are able to do RSP over CAT-M and NB-IoT networks, right? And that's the kind of techno bricks that we want to bring forward in the spec, and that we've proven in the field effectively to make sure that we have pragmatic standards, right?
Yes.
And I think that's really something that's close to my heart, is to take the standards as much as possible from learnings from the field, right? And not being disconnected from the reality of the business and customers' constraints, who say, all that really matters to me is that my device is connected and working at the right price point, right? With the right coverage, right? So that's really, I think, as an industry, the key goal that we should keep in mind is focused on the solution, not about bolt-on adoption of technology for just the sake of it.
Yeah, of course. So Marco, from your perspective as an IoT enabler, so where do you see the eSIM developments and security milestone? Maybe not security milestone, but in the next 12 months, where do you see this?
Well, actually picking up on the remark that Loic just made, and maybe something that we should address, because I think there's maybe some concerns in the market about the evolution of eSIM, right? I think the evolution of eSIM is going to be important. So I think we've come a long way with the standards that we have right now. I think with the Working Group 7, there's going to be a new release of the future of eSIM. So that's going to be very important. At the same time, we can't wait. We have to deploy eSIM at this point in time. So I can imagine there will be questions by people, okay, scratching their head, so I'm going to deploy my eSIM right now, but in 2 years it's going to be a new standard. What does it actually mean to me? So I think as an industry, as solution providers, we have to educate our customers how that transition will look like, going from what we have right now with the M2M flavor, the consumer flavor, and the consumer flavor has his local profile assistant. What does that mean for me? And how does that transition to the new, let's say, eSIM standard? That's probably a very important evolution development over the next 12 months to make sure that people don't, let's say, hold back on the adoption of eSIM. So that's certainly one thing that is big. And maybe Loic wants to address that a little bit more in a bit. The other piece that I mentioned before, I think we should start working with IoT SAFE on a large scale to make sure that the security is even at a higher level. So that combination to us makes a lot of sense. and well, alongside evangelizing what eSIM is, what benefits there are, and that is actually there. It's there, let's use it, let's make things future-proof, let's leverage the capabilities that we have.
Yeah,
but Loic, maybe you want to comment on the
Sure.
roadblock 7.
Yeah. So I think effectively it's very important to say that, there is work ongoing in the standards, but doesn't prevent us to discuss with the partner and people interested to really see what's the right fit for purpose, notably between a more M2M approach or, let's say, a pre-standard SMDP plus based approach, which paves the way towards an easy integration into a full IoT RSP compliant solution. I want to point out this, right, is the industry overall is pretty much in agreement that the SMDP plus as it's defined today is here to stay, right? So this element is not changed, and the investments that the network operator have done in SMDP plus availability, and you see a very large number of platforms available already, is here to stay, right? And that's very important. That is that the profiles, the connectivity profiles, will stay on those and will be made available to the wider IoT world, not just the consumer world. I think that's a transition that we will see. So there is a natural evolution path, and for IoT deployment, there might be cases effectively where an SMDP plus some device management aspect can make total sense already today. And we'll be really pleased to talk about that with you to make sure that you have a good, again, fit-for-purpose solution for the server side. And I want also to comment maybe briefly on the evolution eSIM to iSIM, right? So we've been very big proponent of the integrated SIM evolution. And I have to say that, at least on the standardization aspect, integrated SIM meeting a certain number of security requirements deliver the same functionality as an eSIM, right? So it's RSP capable. You can remote manage profiles on them. So from that standpoint, it's not changing so much from an end customer standpoint. You could be using cellular modules with eSIM or iSIM inside the module, and you couldn't really care less if that's an integrated or an embedded SIM. Because in the end, the solution, the delivery is the same, right? You have the same capabilities to deliver that. Now, on iSIM today, most of the, I would say, engagement that we have are notably in the LP1 space, right? And they're so quite often single profile, that is for a specific country, specific network or deployment. But we are definitely going with some of our partners toward the full RSP-capable integrated SIM as well.
Okay. So Marco, any final words on your side before we conclude today's panel?
Well, I guess it's an invitation to everybody to work together to make this work for the customers. That's something that we put a lot of effort in together with Kigen and others, so let's continue to do that. Let's start using it, certainly. But I think it's important that we embrace the evolution of eSIM as an industry, make sure that we progress and that we make the things available. The ecosystem should become fully mature, and then we'll get there all together.
Thank you very much, everyone. So unfortunately, we're not going to have time for questions. Nevertheless, I think Loic and Marco would be outside after this session.
We will be outside, and those who would really like to try whether eSIM works, yes or no, and customers in the room, please scan this one. This is a trial eSIM kit that you could use.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.